how can companies effectively measure the ROI of their sales enablement efforts, and what metrics should they be tracking to ensure that strategic success? And you spoke a lot about leading and lagging indicators. So a bit of expansion on that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. I guess this is a logical kind of next phase. Okay, I understand this now. What do I actually do about it, right? So Keiran will know all too well kind of what some of the metrics I'm a big fan of. So my recommendation is pretty obvious, really, especially if you've kind of heard me talk about this before. But the first thing I'll say is a strategic enablement function is an ROI-centric enablement function. Right? That's the first thing. So how do we measure ROI? Well, we start right at the beginning, which is revenue. But specifically, I think that there's a challenge that many enablers face when it comes to kind of tying what they do to revenue. And that's meant that they've veered away from it, even being recommended that they don't go towards it, right? Because the financial metrics, it's a hard metric to attribute enablement impact to. Right? It is hard to correlate. And if you try to do that and you fail, especially if you're talking to a business executive or someone in the C-suite, that can damage your credibility, right? And you almost have no way back from there. So my recommendation is to break down revenue into the individual levers that drive revenue. In fact, there are 4 of them, right? It's called the sales velocity equation, right? And that number essentially is a component of the number of qualified opportunities in your pipeline over a given period of time. It's the average deal value, right, based on the deals that you're closing. It's the average win rate. So how many of the qualified opportunities are you actually closing as a percentage? And the average length of sales cycle. So how long does it actually take you to close those deals? Those 4 things, those 4 components are really the only 4 factors that impact how much you sell. Right? If you have a revenue number, right below that are those 4 factors. And then you have a bunch of things below that, right? But that is how you can break up your revenue number into what should be looked at as levers, right? Because each of the levers we can pull. So how do we kind of do this? Well, the sales velocity equation essentially kind of results in a number, which is the rate of revenue generated over a specific period of time. And this kind of helps you to understand the benchmark. Right? But while the benchmark numbers can paint a picture, right? It's the trends that really tell the story, right? So for each of those levers, are we going up? Are we going down? Right? Over a period of a year, quarter and quarter, month on month, kind of which way did we go? And of course, there'll be linearity in the business, right? You know, the last month of the quarter, the last quarter of the year, you will see spikes. But in general, what are the trend lines telling us, right? Now, if the trend lines are stable, I think they're probably okay, especially in the current economy. If they're up, even better. But if they're going down, then now you're starting to focus on the key drivers of revenue, right? What can actually drive those things? So the key is to kind of align those velocity benchmarks and trends to a target based on kind of the benchmarks and what we're looking at, what we will do. Where might we end up if we do nothing, right? Where do we need to go? What is our target? And therefore, what is the gap between the two? Now, when we understand that gap, we can start to pull those levers, right? So what would happen if I increase my number of opportunities by 10%? What if I increase my average deal value by 5%? What about win rate by 6%, right? What if I decrease my length of sales cycle by 5%? What does that do? In fact, those kind of percentages incrementally can equate to 20, 30% year-on-year growth in revenue. Doesn't sound much, but it can, right? That's how we break it up. So those are the kind of the levers of sales velocity. Now, of course, it's still going to be hard to correlate enablement strategy and enablement programs to those levers. So I would always recommend as a middle layer. That middle layer are things like core behaviors, competencies, things that actually drive the levers of sales velocity. So for example, if you wanted to drive win rate, right? One of the core behaviors or core competencies might be around executive selling. It might be around objection handling. It might be around competitive intelligence, right? All things that drive how much we win or how much we lose, right? And those are all the things that enablement can execute against. So now we're starting to see how we can connect the dots, right? Correlate an enablement strategy to this middle layer of behaviors and competencies, to the levers of sales velocity, which in turn drives revenue, which in turn drives commissions. Now, this is my recommendation, but I know it's a lot easier said than done, right? In terms of how I said it. So that is why the company that I founded, Sales Velocity Labs, has actually developed an online sales velocity simulator. That simulator allows sales leaders and enablers to understand their velocity benchmarks, first of all. It allows them to compare it to a target and then simulate pulling those levers. You can actually pull them physically and say, right, how do I pull those levers? Which levers do I pull? How hard do I pull them? When do I pull them? In order to align it to the targets that I'm trying to achieve. And then to align your strategic enablement programs or strategy as a whole to each lever. It's pretty revolutionary. So it's certainly something that can help kind of achieve that correlation that I'm talking about, which is so important here. So yeah, that's my answer to the question, which is how can you actually do this? How can you practically do this? Because there's no real resources out there which shows how to do this, right? But that's certainly a way that I've done with good deal of success.